Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson from the Illinois State Water Survey, and you're attending Septic Systems 101. This webinar is hosted by the State Water Survey at the University of Illinois, and the private well class is sponsoring this program. We are funded through the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and US EPA. And so first thing, if you are a NEHA sanitarian and you're looking for CEs for this event, here's some of the logistics there. You can't get credit for the same course during your credentialing cycle except once. So if you attended this same webinar last year on 7/17/19, as shown in the lower right corner, you can't get credit again for it today. We are also an Illinois licensed LEHP provider. We are in Illinois, and we support our health departments, and we aren't able to do that nationally, but we are doing that for the state of Illinois. So if you need anything, here's an email address, info@privatewellclass.org. Katie Buckley's on the call. She will be taking your emails and providing certificates and all the information related to this event. Also, on your GoToWebinar window, there are 3 handouts, and you can go there and download those, and those will be part of the information you need to provide. Okay, so about today's webinar, this is part of a national program, the Private Well Class, which is funded and supported by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership with funding from US EPA. We actually work with RCAP and their staff. We're kind of the boots on, or they're the boots on the ground side of things, and we're the online part of this program. And so this webinar follows our course, which this webinar is not our private well class. The class is a 10-lesson, once a week class that you sign up for. It sends you a PDF once a week. It's self-paced, and you're able to do those lessons on your own. It's all free. And then if you have questions, these webinars are meant to support that, as well as you can contact us through our email address or our phone number. We are recording this, and it will be available on YouTube, our YouTube channel, and on our website. If you have questions today, not the questions that you signed up with when you registered and you asked questions then, we'll answer some of those today, actually as slides on the presentation. But if you have questions as we go through the material, you can put that in the chat box or question box. Katie's keeping track of that. And at the end, we'll pull those questions up and go through those if you're willing to stick around. So there will be time for follow-up questions at the end. I do want to mention that we're all still working from home, and that means my 8-year-old daughter may surprise us at some point, or we've had problems with our internet once in a while, or my neighbors may decide to mow, and we'll just fight through it if that's what happens. So anyway, so my name is Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the State Water Survey, and the Water Survey is a unique organization. It's sort of a state agency. We're a sister division of the State Geological Survey and Natural History Survey, and we deal with water in the state. We house the state's well logs, and we also have a public service lab that provides well owners in Illinois with sampling opportunities. We're lucky to have with us Jim Starbird, who is with RCAP Solutions, which is the Northeast RCAP. He's a licensed sanitarian, and for 7 years was a health department septic inspector, and graciously agreed to provide us with as our expert panelist, and will be answering almost all the questions that we have today. And Katie Buckley, already mentioned, is with us. She's an outreach specialist with our program. She works at the Water Survey on our team, and she's taking your questions, as well as we'll work with you afterward related to any requests for certificates or continuing education. A little bit about RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. They're a technical assistance and training provider, and they work all over the country. They have staff in every state, well over 200 staff total. We work with a subset of each of these 6 regional nonprofits who are working on the private well program with us, And as I mentioned, they're the boots on the ground. So they do, they answer requests in their states. They hold workshops when we're not under quarantine, so to speak, with sanitarians as well as well owners. They do assessments of wells, and it's all free. And so this is where they're at. So you can see which organization might serve the state that you live in. And if you want to contact someone from one of the RCAP affiliates, regional nonprofits, you can also contact us and we'll get you in touch with the right folks. So at least 3, if not 4 of these RCAP regions offer low interest loans through the USDA's private well program. And there are certainly economic constraints. It's for low income folks, but if you're interested in finding out more about that, we can let you know. So a little bit about the water survey where I work. We were established in 1895, and it was established by the state legislature because of cholera and typhoid outbreaks around the state. So the water survey was formed to document that, collect water samples, and try to curtail this problem that was occurring. And so it's grown into a research agency as well as a service agency of the state, housed at the University of Illinois. We house the state's well logs, as I mentioned, and our public service lab does, until 2008, did free sampling for well owners in Illinois for inorganics and metals. It's still subsidized through the state, so it's very reasonable for someone to get their well sampled through us. And it's most of the work we do is related to like the service that we do by running the private well class. We're here to help citizens in Illinois. Someone can call me and I can offer them information about other wells in the area, water quality of the aquifer if they're going to put in a new well, all kinds of information because we've been a resource for well over 100 years. Matter of fact, this is our 125th anniversary, and we had plans to go all over the state and give presentations and do workshops, and that was all canceled because of COVID-19. So as an example, this is in our files from Pana, Illinois, and they had a typhoid outbreak in 1916. You can see here this diagram. Our staff went down and investigated why there was an outbreak. What we knew at the time going in was that only half the town was sewered, the other half was still septic, and they had a water treatment plant they just built a few years before, but it was too expensive to run, so they weren't using it. So we went down there assuming it was one of those 2 things causing this problem. After investigating this in the cases, we learned that it was actually the Pana Ice Cream Company, which is right in the center of the map there. And it wasn't their ice cream, it was their milk service. So they provided milk to almost everyone in town and some and other areas. And the way that was done is you went in to their facility. There was a milk bucket sitting there. You dipped the bucket of milk in the big vat that housed all the milk, and then you poured it into your own container, and then you paid for it and took off. So it got into the milk, and everybody used it, and that's what ended up happening there. It's just an example of the type of things that we were involved in back then and why we were formed, and the history we have in protecting public health. So we've recently been going through our really old stuff trying to eliminate some storage, and we found this whole set, several thousand glass plate slides. And these go back close to 1900, some of them. And this particular slide was a negative that I made into a print from a picture from a book. And our advice back then, which was in the early 1900s, when most people, especially residential folks, didn't have indoor plumbing, was to build a sanitary privy. And so this was a picture taken, somebody took a picture of this from a book, and it was to show, here's what you can do along with the plans to build a sanitary privy. And it's really interesting here. It says, it's believed that any 14-year-old schoolboy of average intelligence and mechanical ingenuity can, by following these plans, build a sanitary privy for his home. So that's the world we lived in back then. And so, and septic tanks were something that actually communities use. So This is the inside of the Urbana, Illinois septic tank from 1913. And so for the town, they did have wastewater treatment or wastewater distribution lines, but the water all came to this septic tank, and that's what it was labeled on the slide of the Urbana septic tank. And to show you what it was like back then, this is obviously very large, but this is a picture from the outside. And you can see this is Champaign-Urbana in 1913, which is where we live now and where the University of Illinois is. But this septic tank really was only difference, I guess you'd say, with the way it used to be, or the way it is today, is we don't discharge directly into a creek like they did here. And so we've come a long way, but this is the way things started. The initial effort was to get the waste away from people in their homes. And so this is what we did until we learned differently. And over time, that's evolved, just like treatments evolved and everything else. And so it's really interesting to go back and look at this information and what they thought were best practices then versus what we're going to teach you today or explain to you today. So getting to the original, our main topic today, conventional septic systems, which most people have. Septic systems, they are wastewater treatment systems, but they rely on natural bacteria and natural degradation to take care of the waste that we produce. So all the water from your shower, toilet, sink, all goes into this large tank where bacteria can break it down, and then as it's broke down, it can go out into your septic field where it can infiltrate into the ground, where more soil and bacteria in the soil can break that down into more harmless stuff. So it really, the purpose of the tank is to separate the solids and as well as give bacteria time to break things down. And I'll show you a picture in a second of what that looks like. But the idea is as water comes in, more than that other water leaves from the other end. It's already been treated, so to speak, at least the first way through. It goes into your distribution septic field piping, where then it can disperse into the ground and be further treated and be rendered harmless. So here's what that looks like. This is a 2-compartment tank. So on the far left is where things come into your septic system, your septic tank, and you can see all the solids build up on the bottom. And that's meant to be the first compartment to catch most of the material. And then through a filtered opening, it goes into the second tank where bacteria can continue to work on that. And then that, when the water level's high enough, goes out through another filtered pipe into your soil absorption field, as it shows here, where the holes in the pipe allow the water and basically dissolved material to infiltrate into the sand layer you've built for your absorption field or septic field, and then that can slowly percolate through, with the sand also acting as a filter. And there's some solids floating on top here. That's called, well, I get to the next diagram. That's called the scum. The things that float are lighter, obviously less dense than water, and then the sludge falls to the bottom. This is a 1-compartment tank on the left, and then on the right, we're showing you what a distribution field looks like, absorption field. So typically you dig these out, put several feet of sand, and then lay the pipe on top and then cover it so that it gives it more volume for the water to, it's easy for it to go through the sand and spread. And this is, as it says here, there are 25 million homes that have septic systems or on-site wastewater systems in the US. This is a dated number, it's probably higher than that. I know I just read on the US EPA Septic Smart website, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, that a third of all new construction have decentralized wastewater, even in urban areas. They're finding that it's not necessarily better to have a centralized wastewater system in some cases, especially small subdivisions and things like that. They can build either individual systems or clustered systems for an entire neighborhood that can then be taken care of individually, and those work just as well. So it's becoming more popular. It keeps things local. It allows, where it's possible, it allows for less costly treatment or centralized treatment and upkeep of distribution lines. So when they do fail, you usually will know. You see things like where your absorption field is, or maybe even between your tank and your field, deep, thick green grass. If it gets bad enough, it may pool water, and it's going to be spongy, and it's going to be really green, and it's going to smell in most cases. And it can even back up into your house. If everything gets plugged because you haven't pumped your tank, or there's been too many solids put in it or whatever, then it'll back up into your home. And we had even in town that can happen with a regular wastewater system, because a number of years ago, we were living in an old home, and roots had got into our outflow for all of our wastewater and plugged it up, and it came back up through our basement toilet. So it happens even without a septic system. You got to take care of and make sure that there aren't things like trees that can get in the way. And all this is preventable if you just know what to do and maintain your system like you're supposed to. So there's really these issues: proper sizing and design, especially if you're putting in a new one. I know some states like Massachusetts, Jim will tell you they base the size of the septic tank based on the number of bedrooms in a home. In Illinois, I don't think it's that strict, but you should try to size your tank based on what you expect the use to be by number of people, the kind of water use you typically have. And so that's how you size and design that. We'll go into that in a minute. Also, for public health protection, some places there are regulations. Will it have an impact if you're in a karst area, for instance, or a really sandy area, or if you have a really shallow water table? Some states have rules. You have to have an above ground tank or some other advanced treatment. Others may not have those rules, and you see septic systems sitting right on top of bedrock, for instance, where it can go directly into the aquifer, and those are certainly a problem. And just knowing how to maintain your system. So for size and design, that's really about, once it's been sized, it tells you how often you need to pump your tank to remove the solids. Every tank fills up with solids. So you do have to pump it at some point, or it'll eventually fail. And if that clogs, those solids can get into your distribution system, they'll plug that perforated pipe, then your distribution system is no good and have to be dug up. And that's a huge undertaking. So, and like I said here, many older systems actually ran straight to a field tile or straight to a stream, which is very bad. And we do, like I said before, some still do. And those need to be taken care of, because you're polluting, affecting ecology, maybe even polluting someone downstream or a community that may use water from that particular stream or river for their public water supply. So if you have a straight pipe, consider that impact. Also, it's illegal, and find out from a licensed installer what you should do to fix that and put in the right kind of system. Do you understand where your drain field is, the groundwater flow direction? Sometimes, if we knew this all the time, it would make it a lot easier for where to install your well versus your septic. If you knew the flow direction was to the north, then you put your well on the south side of your home and your septic system on the north side of your home, so that water is flowing away from your well. But that isn't always possible. Matter of fact, most of the time it's not possible to know the direction of the shallow water table. You can use land surface as a surrogate to kind of give you an idea which way it's likely flowing. But if it's fairly level ground like we have in Illinois, that's going to be an issue. So it's making sure it's a proper distance and it's designed properly will help mitigate where that water may travel and how clean it is when it actually gets to the water table. And there's also other considerations like how deep your well is. If your water is not using shallow groundwater, maybe if you're in a glacial environment like we are in northern Illinois or central Illinois, it may be that your well's 700 feet deep and it's protected by, in my county, Champaign County, we're protected by 100 feet of clay between the surface and our aquifer. So anything in that a septic system discharges, it's effluent, is going through a lot of material, and it's going to take a long time. And so our aquifer is pretty protected, but that isn't everyone's situation. And just knowing those things and how deep your well is and How deep your piping is another issue. You may have a 200-foot well, but it may only have 20 feet of pipe if it's an older well and it's in bedrock. Whereas if it's a 200-foot sand and gravel well, it's going to have 190 feet of pipe before you have an opening where the water can come in. So all those things are important to understand. As far as maintenance, they have to be managed just like your well or everything else that you have, your car, everything. They'll eventually fail, but if you manage it properly and take care of it, reduce what you put in. Don't put things like toxics down the drain. People who dump medicine down their toilet, especially things like amoxicillin or something you may have used for a cold or whatever, that kills bacteria, right? It's an antibiotic. And so it's going to hurt the bacteria that are in your tank trying to break down your waste. So other things like cat litter, grease, coffee grounds don't break down readily, and they add to the sludge in the bottom. And so if you're putting those things in, it's going to clog your system quicker. And I'm sure I'm going to mention this in a minute, but the same thing with a garbage disposal. The solids that are generated from garbage disposals, eggshells and vegetable ends and all those things, they're still intact enough that it's hard for bacteria to break those down without a lot of time. So they end up as part of the sludge in the bottom of your tank. And actually the recommendations are that you would only, you'd want to pump your tank twice as much if you're using a garbage disposal. So there's a lot of things to consider. This is from NEHA, the National Environmental Services Center. It's just one guide that's out there on size of tank, number of people in the household, and how often you should pump your tank. So for instance, if you have a 1,000-gallon tank and you have 6 people, you need to pump it every year and a half. And it's just based on the volume coming in and how quickly things can get broken down because of how much use you have. You're doing more laundry, you're doing, taking more showers. It's just a lot more water flowing through, and that doesn't give the bacteria time to break things down as readily, so you're going to end up with more solids. And so this is just, again, one guide you can look at. I believe there's others. The other thing to do, we'll get to that later. So things you can do: maintain the area around your tank and drain field. You should be able to use the inspection port and a manhole if it's got one separately, or if it's got more than one manhole. No trees, concrete or asphalt on the drain field, especially the concrete and asphalt and those things. You're driving over it. Compresses the soil. It can eventually compress both sides above and below and make it more difficult for water to naturally percolate through. And so no trees. We already mentioned tree roots. Tree roots are a real problem, and people who want to have trees, we've even seen trees cause problems with private wells when they're PVC wells and the tree's too close to the well. It can crack the casing. So especially with perforated pipe, those roots are seeking water, and that's where they're going to find it. So you want to keep trees away from your drain field. As far as reducing the flow of water, you can conserve as much as you want to, and we're not really talking about being stingy with your water, but it's best not to put things like you have your sub pump or a whirlpool or even softener backwash hooked to it, just from the volume perspective. And we've had several questions about softener backwash, which we'll get to at the end. But just as a general rule, you should only be flushing your toilet, taking a shower, those things. You shouldn't add additional sources. Because the more water that runs through it, the less time bacteria have to actually work on that and break it down. So, and only put wastewater into your septic system. I mentioned garbage disposals already. Any additives, you don't need additives, so we'll get to that too. There's a lot of questions about that. But, paint, we hear of all kinds of things that people have put down their toilets are flushed, and it's just, it's a natural system. Let it be natural, and it'll last you a lot longer and do a lot better job. So you can also inspect your tank or have someone come out and inspect your tank. I know there's a way to measure the sludge depth, and another rule of thumb there, I believe, I don't remember the percentage. Jim can probably tell us later. But you can also judge your solids based on how full your tank gets, and that can be your guide for when to pump it. The issue there is you have to remember to go out and check it. And I know that can be an issue. People say, well, I'll maintain it myself, or I'll make sure I measure the solids, but it's easy to forget those things if you're not doing it regularly. So I want to point you to a few resources, and that's what the rest of this is going to be about, because there's a lot of information here. The EPA has developed quite a septic system program. It's called Septic Smart. And so they've started a Septic Smart Week. It's always in September. You can see here when that's going to be this year. It's really just meant to raise public awareness and provide resources for anyone using a septic system. And so there's just a ton of information here, and I'm going to go through some of it. But you can go to this page. It's really simple. It's epa.gov/septic to get to all this information. So when you go to learn about septic systems, it gives you an overview here, and there's a list on the left. And so I'm going to click on Septic Smart Homeowners, and it gives you all the information. If you don't know what type of septic system you have, how they work, why you need to maintain them, a lot of good resources. And so, but how your septic system can impact water resources, which, our program, the private well class, is really based on how it affects your private well, as well as how you're protecting the source water in your area. Even if it's not affecting your well, it can affect a neighbor's well or source water quality in a stream or river. And so that's why it's important to all of us. But there's all these tools that explain things. I mentioned earlier groundwater flow direction. Well, here's an example of that. They've got this diagram on septic systems and drinking water. And when you click on that, there's a table that explains things at the bottom, or there's a diagram here. You look at this diagram, so you have your drinking water well on one side of the home and your drain field on the other side. But the groundwater flow direction down in the aquifer happens to be back towards the well. So it's still possible, although unlikely, if it's well designed and depending on the depth and how protected the aquifer is. These little arrows, like between 3 and 4 on the diagram, that could be 5 years, or it could be 2 days. It really depends on the type of soil and the type of geologic material there and how quick it is to get to the water table. Our water table is 7 feet in Champaign County. It might be a lot deeper, or this well being in the water table, it means it's a shallow well. In many cases, wells are much deeper than this, and maybe there's a clay layer between the water table and where the aquifer is. So this is a simplified version, but it just shows you what can happen, especially if you have an older well that maybe is dug or bored and it's taking advantage of the water table for its water supply. Going back to that, I came back to this page to show you where you can click on technical resources about septic systems. And so every state has information available about their septic program. Some states have many rules and regulations. Like in the Northeast, they're trying to protect the Chesapeake Bay, and this led to a lot of states having very strict regulations, Massachusetts being one of those, which is an advantage for us that Jim worked there because he understands all those issues, versus others that may just have resources for folks who have septic systems, and they don't have the staff or the wherewithal in that state to actually go out and create a program and enforce rules and some of those things. And that just is just the way it is. So when you click on products approved by state, you can go through and find your state. And if you go down here, I went to Massachusetts and Idaho, actually. And so here's what Idaho has online. It's just one example, and what regulations they have. It explains where you can get those and how to go through your public health district and who to talk to. Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, has much more resources. They have a very robust set of regulations on how to use septic systems properly, how to inspect them properly, how to design them properly based on the soil, how to make sure there's enough distance between where the septic field releases water and the water table, all of those things so they can protect their groundwater. And so as you go through there, they're called Title V wells, which I can't even tell you what that is. Jim can. But there's a lot of rules, and inspectors and soil scientists get involved, and a lot of good things to try to protect groundwater. And so there's information. If you're in Massachusetts, you can start right here, Septic Systems in Title V. And so it's I'm just trying to show kind of the other end of the spectrum, where they really have thought things through and came up with resources that help every well owner, especially if you're buying a home that might have a septic system. So just going to scroll through these. There's a lot of information if you're from Massachusetts. So going back to the front page, if you will, some things that have been added since last year. One is there's more webcasts, which they record their webcasts for different things. And if you click on that page, you can see there's a lot of information here. State examples of septic system data management, even about career perspectives for decentralized wastewater management. There's going to be a shortage of wastewater, and septic installers and those folks, they expect there to be a shortage. And so it's a good career path if anyone's interested. But even as far as homeowners, if you're trying to finance a home, there's this video from USDA that was done jointly with EPA on the USDA's rural development program. So if you're in a rural area, depending on criteria, not only home loans, but loans for septic and wells. And a lot of those are based on income. But there's resources out there, and these presentations are a good source for some of that information. And they've also developed this funding for septic systems page under the technical resources tab. And a number of these are really for small communities or communities like the Clean Water SRF is a funding program for wastewater systems and communities to use for their decentralized. There's also, it says watershed and estuary management. But if you keep going down this page, there's other resources like the USDA Rural Development one, where there may be some loan programs that would be able to help you. For instance, the Farm Bill provided funding for the USDA to provide loans, low interest loans, for folks to put in a well or to fix a well. Well, the last Farm Bill that was passed in 2019 added to that the ability to use it for septic systems. I think the USDA is still working on how to implement those new rules, but by the end of this year, they expect to have a program in place to allow folks to use their low interest loans, which are like 1%, I think, to provide resources. And Jim, if I say anything out of step, you're probably more aware of these things. Feel free just to jump in anytime. So I also want to mention two other things. I think this septic finance learning module, so learn about septic systems. There's a tab down here I've highlighted in yellow. It takes you to the Water Finance Clearinghouse. If you click on learning modules along the menu along the top, there's one for financing septic systems. And when you get to that, then you can go through that, and it talks about, it's just a nice little free class to help you understand better about your system and how and new construction issues. And then for anyone who is a provider, so if you're a county health department or a septic provider or extension or anyone that does outreach to private well owners or to septic system owners, they have an outreach toolkit available that goes along with Septic Smart Week, which is a good time to launch a lot of those things, but it gives you a lot of tools. And if you click on Outreach Toolkit, you can see this page goes on, but I clicked on Quick Tip Videos, and there's 5 new videos. I think there's 5 that they've developed that are things you can put out there in public service announcements and that sort of thing for the folks that you serve. And here's just the 4 of those. And then further down the outreach page, I mentioned it keeps going. There's a lot of information you can download. There's even magnets that you can order, posters you can put up, a lot of things to help you help the folks you serve. And I want to point out even further down the page is this new Homebuyer's brochure and guide to septic systems. And so it's certainly something that you should consider to download. And they've left this space intentionally blank, I believe, so that like a real estate agent or a local health department can put their information there on a label and stick it on there and hand them out. But you as a homeowner can also just go download this yourself. Under more resources, I just wanted to point out that you can even get to more information they have about private wells, and that goes back to their private drinking water well page. And over on the box on related links to the right, the first bullet there is free private well training. That's the private well class. So it kind of goes full circle and takes you back to a lot of opportunities to learn more about your well and your septic system. And so I just wanted to, if Septic Smart's something you should be familiar with. There's a lot to go through there, but it's really worthwhile. And I will say that in the end, it's still best to work with your local or county health department and ask them your questions, or co-op extension, or even your licensed septic inspector installer. And I know we had questions like, how do I know that my septic installer is on the up and up, and how do I find the best one or that I can trust? Talk to your neighbors, talk to your health department. May not be willing to say, well, we can't pick one over another, but some will. And extension might be able to, or others who are experts in the field. But ask your neighbors, ask someone who's been around a while, ask a lot of questions, and you'll find out who's on the up and up. Who does outreach? You know, do you have septic inspectors or installers in your area that actually come to public meetings and provide information? Those folks want everybody to learn, and they're the ones most likely to probably do a good job. Other resources, NEHA, I showed that table earlier on size of septic tanks, but it's NEHA at westvirginia.edu, and there's a septic systems page there with some resources. Some of those are dated, but there's still a lot of good stuff there. And then even University of Minnesota has this program where actually, if you can tell it the information you have on your septic tank, it can develop you an owner's guide. And so it's something that you can use as a well owner if you don't have an owner's guide for that particular type, or you can, if you're an outreach professional, you can try to find a document to give to the well owner or the septic owner you're trying to help through this program. And it's called Community Septic. So there's mobile resources. Now this is dated. It says the 2014 Water Pro Conference, but a number of years ago, the National Rural Water Association did put out this app, and it's not, it's kind of short-lived because it's not something you will use time and time again. But if you first download it and go through all the questions it asks and some of those things, it can provide some good information that you might not have been aware of about your tank, about pumping schedule, some of those things. But again, once you've gone through that and answered those questions, there's not a lot of follow-up, and I don't know that it's been updated since then, but it's still a decent resource, especially if you're new to really trying to understand your septic system. And ask a bunch of questions, as I mentioned. It talks about some other resources. So I want to go back to RCAP for a minute, because one of the other things that we've done with RCAP is we developed an assessment tool. It's if you're familiar with sanitary surveys, a sanitary survey is something that every community water supply has to do their drinking water system every 3 years by law under the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's kind of It's kind of a vulnerability assessment of a water system. So we developed one that now RCAP is using all over the country, and they've done a bunch of these as a tool to go out and work with the well owner and try to help them understand where their vulnerabilities might be, what things might be risky, look at their geology, their well log if it's available, and try to basically give them basic information to help them understand their well. It's one-on-one with an RCAP person. It's free, and it's something I know Jim's done a lot of. And a lot of times the state will call him and ask him to do an assessment for someone who's got a problem well, where they've had contamination or they're having some health issues. So it's a really useful tool. It's something through our funding that RCAP's able to do a number of every year. And so I wanted to point out one of the things in this assessment is Section 10 on septic systems. So it asks a series of questions, and this is what they would ask you to try to get an idea of what kind of tank you have, how long it is, have you pumped it. It's a good opportunity if you're the one filling out the assessment to say, well, if you haven't pumped your tank in 10 years, you probably need to consider having someone come inspect it and consider how thick the solids are. You may be close to a problem. So it gives you an opportunity to go through with the RCAP staff, and some of us, I do them too. It gives us a chance to go through every aspect of your private well system and what could possibly contaminate it, and go through that with you as a well owner to help you understand, here's the issues you need to be concerned about. Maybe there's none, and for a lot of well owners, there aren't any real concerns, but it's a way to at least make you more aware of what issues could affect your well that you may not have been that used to or that aware of. And so As I mentioned, they're like a sanitary survey. You as a professional, if you're with a health department, it's a chance to use this to educate well owners about their specific situation and well. And I say that because nearly every single well is unique. Not necessarily their depth or how they're drilled, but their surroundings, how they're used, what people are doing near their well for land use. You end up with very specific situations in a lot of cases. We found wells in basements or even in a kitchen. And so why that would happen, I'm not sure, but some people feel like maybe that's the best way to handle it, and so that's what they did, and it could have been 50 years ago or more. So the idea, though, is through this assessment, we're able to help teach well owners about best practices, including for their septic system, and it encourages them to communicate. I don't know how many well owners have came to me and said, well, I'm not going to call my local health department. They might tell me I can't drink my water. Well, the first question you should ask your local health department is, do you have any authority to condemn my well? In 99% of the country, the answer is no. They're there to help you understand your well and your septic and what risks you might have, and they want to help you protect your family's health. Now, a few local jurisdictions have created ordinances that allow them to abandon or condemn a well, and you should ask first if you're concerned about that, because they'll let you know, and then you can decide whether you want to actually work with them or not. I would still work with them because you want to get it fixed. You want to protect your family's health, and I'm just making that message clear. So they've done over 2,000 of these assessments, probably closer to 2,400 by now around the country, which is awesome. They've also, as I mentioned, they do workshops. We've done a number of 4-hour workshops for professionals, mostly sanitarians, that teach them how to use the assessment tool. And the RCAP staff aren't doing those particular workshops anymore. We are, as online workshops. We did one last January, and we'll probably do one again before the end of the year. And if you're interested in that, you can email us. But it's free. It walks through the assessment tool and a couple examples. And the other thing the assessment program has done is really allowed RCAP staff to develop partnerships with some local jurisdictions. I said state and county, but local efforts. I always forget, in Illinois, our counties are health departments, but in areas like in the Northeast, it's not a county health department, it's a local health district based on a community in most cases. So they're very different in how they're legally set up, but they work in about the same size of an area, maybe a little smaller, and they have the same mission. And so, this picture is just a brand new and a 2-month-old filter. The black is iron and manganese for reference. So that's what I have on the septic system part of things, but I do want to talk a little bit about our class. So I'm going to do a few slides on that, and then we'll get to your questions. So as I mentioned, the private well class is a set of 10 lessons. You sign up online, it's self-paced. We basically send you a PDF once a week for 10 weeks, and you're on your own to read it. If you have questions, you can email us. There's support documents that go along with it, and then we do these webinars so that you can ask us questions as well. But if you go to our website, privatewellclass.org, this is what you'll see, and there's a button right in the middle that says Take Our Free Class, or on the bottom left it says Learn by Email. Click on one of those, and it takes you to this page, which allows you to sign up. And it's just your email address and your first name. We only ask where you live, and you click on that, and it's a drop down of all the states. Because one of the things as part of our funding from US EPA and through RCAP is that we need to show that we're reaching a national audience. And it is. As a matter of fact, we've had people from probably close to 20 countries who have contacted us that they've taken our class and signed up. There's not a place for them to put where they live. But anyway, it's been very worthwhile. We've had probably close to 76 or 7,800 people take our class over the last 4+ years, and another 15 to 20,000 participated in our webinars that are all unique. And so we think we're doing a good job, and it's really worth your time, even just to have those materials. But it walks you through step by step from source water protection and how water gets in your well, all the way through issues you need to consider if you're going to add treatment, and everything in between. For each of the lessons, there's also a series of other documents that we put together and have in our resource library. So for lesson 1 is about the science of groundwater. It's how it moves, what aquifers are, the hydrologic cycle, all that stuff And so if the lesson didn't really sink in, or the way it was written didn't really make a lot of sense for some reason, everyone's different in how they learn and read and what they can appreciate. And so there's these other resources that may give you more insight. And that's for each of the 10 lessons. We also do webinars like the one we're doing today. This is the one from 2 years ago. And as I mentioned, even the one 2 years ago, it's worth going to the second half and watching the questions and seeing if there's any questions there that we didn't answer today that you might be interested in, or if you're really just trying to learn more about your septic system. There are a lot of questions between the webinars we've done over the last 4 or 5 years just on septic systems. We do targeted ones. We haven't done this one for a couple years either. We did it twice, and once in 2016 and once in 2018. We think all the resources are there, but a big issue has been over the last 5 years, lead in drinking water. Well, it's not in your well water, typically, very rarely. It's in your plumbing and your piping. And so it depends on what kind of pipes you have and how aggressive or corrosive your water might be, whether or not those lead will leach into your drinking water and actually show up at your tap. But this goes through. We had an expert from Virginia Tech come and present most of the material for this. She's done a lot of work looking at lead in private wells. Virginia happens to have some very low pH water in their groundwater, so they have a lot more aggressive water that tends to leach lead in certain parts of the state. And so she's done a lot of research on that, and it's really worth your time if you have an older home that might have lead pipes or lead solder and copper pipes, for instance. And that's really any home before 2014, before the solder rules changed. So we also put a resource page together for this. So there's more information out there. It's just privatewellclass.org/lead. And so you can see that type of information there. We also have several other resource pages like that, and you can get to that from our resource library. There's a list of what pages we've developed. And then we also developed these short videos. How does my private well pressure tank work? I show this one because it's by far the most watched video we have. It's well over 300,000 views since 2016. And what we learned from that is that most people either have low water pressure. Well, one, that a lot of people have low water pressure and they're trying to figure out how to change that. And two, there's not a lot of good information out there about your pressure tank because it is really very popular. But we have about 20 of these. It says 19 here on things like, what is an aquifer? What is a sand and gravel aquifer? What is a bored well? Really, they're 4 to 6 minutes long. They're really meant to give you just a quick overview of some of the basic concepts related to that issue, which sharing a private well is no different. I know we had at least 1 or 2 questions here where someone said they shared a well, even for this webinar, and we get that all the time. It's really worth watching this video. Some states, actually one state actually regulates down to if 2 homes are on a well, it's considered a special type of public water supply, and that's Washington State. But most states don't have any rules. And so you'll find 5 or 6 homes on a well where they originally built that way, and the contractor only put in 1 well and expects them all to share it. Well, it may not have enough water for 5 or 6 homes, or there may be pressure problems for the person who's farthest on the line, or everyone may agree to use this well, but then somebody moves, and now all of a sudden the person who just bought the home that actually has the well on it may decide they don't want to share the well. And unless you have something in writing, a legal agreement, or it's in your deed, you're just going to be out of luck. And so if you share a well, it's worth understanding what those situations are. And lastly, we have a podcast. We've only done the first 3 lessons of the 10. Podcasts are much more difficult to try to deal with because we can't have diagrams and figures to get our point across. And so I personally have found them a challenge. But we've done the first 3, and as well as we've done some interviews for the RFD network in Illinois, and they've graciously allowed us to share those recordings. And so it's another way for you to learn. And they're really popular. I think we've had probably over 2,700 downloads or more, and that may be low, but they work. So, and lastly, if you're a provider and you have native Spanish speakers in your area, we do have a Spanish version of this class, and including all the diagrams and a number of the videos, not all of them, but some. And so that's something that's available out there. So the goal of our program overall is really about making you as a well owner, or helping you as a well owner understand why your well is important. And you can't just, my dad always assumed our well water is better than city water because it didn't have chemicals in it. Cities put chemicals in their water, not understanding that our 14-foot dug well that was muddy every time it rained was totally susceptible to surface contamination. And I'm sure most of the time it was contaminated. And that's what I grew up on. But anyway, it's important to understand why it's important and why you need to protect it. Understand how it works so you understand when you have problems, what they might be. And lastly, and most importantly, about that you can protect yourself and your family from risk, from surface contamination and things like that. And old wells like the one I grew up on are all over the place. Old hand-dug wells that are using the water table. Some are in karst areas where surface contamination through sinkholes is occurring daily. And it's, if you always drank it, it may not seem like a big issue. But I know for me, after I left home and went to college, when I came home and tried to drink our water, it made me sick. And it's because my body had gotten used to it. I went away. I started drinking city water that did have chlorine in it. And it changed the bacteria in my stomach. And after that, I couldn't drink our well water anymore. And so you need to think about, well, it's not going to affect me, but what about your kids or grandkids or neighbors or anybody else that may come and drink water from your home? You really need to keep them from doing that if your well is not safe. Okay, so we received over 100 questions from you all, which is awesome. And obviously we can't answer all those today, but if you asked a question, especially a specific question about your state or the rules in your state, you can email us and we'll try to look into it, but we're not going to answer those today. We have a national audience and there's about 360 people on today. And so we've tried to cover the questions that were asked the most and the ones that provide the most advice, or if you will, and broad information related to our topic today, which is septic systems. But if as we go through these or anything I've said already and you have a question, remember to use the question box or the chat box, and Katie's monitoring that, and she's making a list and we'll go with those at the end. So, and again, I want to thank Jim Starbird from RCAP Solutions for being here today. As you'll see as we get to these questions, most of them are just the questions. There's no answers listed on the slide because Jim's going to answer them for us, so which I really appreciate. Okay, so Jim, I'm just going to read you the question. If I have anything to add, I will, but these are all for you. So the first one is, we have a vacation home on a septic. What is the best way to calculate when it's time to empty?
I would say if it's a vacation home and you're only using it, say, 6 months a year, then I would calculate it at the end of the season before you're going to close down the home. One thing to keep in mind, too, when you have a vacation home, you're not using it for 6 months, you're stopping those biological processes in that septic tank. You're no longer feeding it, you're no longer keeping it warm. And, if we're talking summer home, throughout the winter, you're pretty much starting fresh every spring. You might have the seeds from, whatever's left there in the spring, but you basically have starved and made it inhospitable to the bacteria in that septic tank to continue to grow, if you will. So I would say at the end of the year, check it out, see what it is, but definitely keep in mind, too, that you're really starting from zero every spring. So having a huge house party on Memorial Day weekend is probably not the best idea.
So those solids from the year before, if you don't pump it, are just basically laying in the bottom and making your tank smaller.
Yeah, I mean, the biological process will go on for a while, as, when there's still food and it was still warm out. But as, say if you're in a cold climate, like we are in New England, the ground gets colder, biological process slow down. You're not dumping any room temperature or warm water down there to heat it up. And you're not giving it any food, so you're really, starting by the time springtime comes around, you're pretty much starting fresh. There might be some food left in there and some seeding that would make the biological process start up, but you're basically starting over after 6 months of not use.
Sure. All right. Thanks. So why does my septic tank need 2 risers?
Well, hopefully you have a 2-compartment tank, which is the most common code here in Massachusetts. So you would need entrance in both sides of that tank. Also, to look at your inlet and your outlet, the inlet going into your septic tank and your outlet, to make sure everything's running right. The water's at the operational level, not too high, not too low. So, really get in there and clean out both sides and make sure everything's working.
Okay. The concrete lid for my septic riser is not level, at a noticeable slant. Is this a concern, intentional, or just sloppy installation work?
I would say it's a concern. It's your riser should be sitting on top of your tank and usually flush right up the grade and then regraded in after installed. If that noticeable slant, it could be sloppy work or it could be some kind of damage, frost heave, who knows that. It might be that the riser's not even connected to the tank anymore, and it's kind of turned over. So I definitely think there's an issue there. What it is from just that, I couldn't tell you, but I think it's a concern. Okay,
so there was a ton of questions about additives. So I'm going back to, we researched this when we first started this program because we had so many questions. And honestly, the first time I put out there that you don't need additives, I got hate mail from people who said they've used additives for 20 years and never had to pump their tank. And again, I'll say what I said before. My comment there is just wait, because everything we've looked at and researched shows that septic system works best using the natural bacteria from our bodies. And if it's ran properly and you're not putting things you shouldn't in there, you do not need any kind of additives to run that. And I think I have another point here. And Nessie had this, also this septic thing about additives, and looking at some of the research that had been done, and there's really no proof that using additives works and helps in a properly managed septic tank. Jim, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's a controversial issue. The only thing that I could really see it might help is, like we talked about the seasonal systems, is given a biological charge. But I'm not even, I wouldn't say that's a proven science either. I guess maybe to get the biological charge to start it up, but as a normal practice, I don't think it's really needed. But again, if it's worked for a lot of people for a number of years, it's tough to tell them it doesn't.
Oh, I get that. Yeah.
It wouldn't replace pumping though. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and sure. No, and I get that. Yeah. It's just, to me, I mean, the thing, you're putting money into your system you probably don't need to, is the bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. I think nature has a way of taking care of itself, if you will.
Yeah. Okay, so what's a good rule of thumb on when to pump a septic tank? And I'm assuming that's in addition to using a chart.
Yeah, it's I think your best rule would be to, if you have a reliable pumper that would at least come out and, hey, not even pump it if it doesn't need it, need another year. But even if they pumped it and told you, hey, you could probably get away with 3 years as opposed to 2. Keep in mind that most septic systems are, well, at least in Massachusetts, we build them for 5-bedroom with 2 people in each bedroom. So if you have a 3-bedroom home and there's only 2 of you living there, the system's really built for 6 people. So, you could technically, every year and a half, 2 years is kind of the average to pump. It could go up 12 years. So it's on use and what you put in there. There's no real good rule of thumb. I thought that chart you showed was pretty spot on as like a baseline, and then maybe use that if you have a reliable pumper that says, hey, maybe you get another year, then maybe you can go out 3 years instead of 2. But there's no set in stone way to say, And at the same time, it's what you put down there. If you daily put down disposable wipes that don't really break down, then you're going to have a bigger problem than this if you just use septic safe toilet paper, if you will.
No, that was a question several people asked too. I think I have that on here towards the end. How do I find my septic tank and clean out access? And we probably get this question 10 to 20 times for every septic webinar. So a lot of people don't even know where their tank is. And so it's really an important question to help them find that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking an all concrete tank, the best way is to follow your drain pipe out and then kind of like use a metal probe, very thin but tough probe to go into the ground and kind of probe where your tank wood might be gently. If you have a fiberglass tank, I would not recommend that. You know, if you happen to have some metal, like a metal cover on them, maybe use a metal detector. But that really be your easiest way other than just digging. And if you get the plans, the original as-built plans, you can at least measure off a house or other things on that plan to maybe able to recommend direction. But that'd probably be your easiest way at this point. Once you do find it, where those access points are, I would definitely, if not add risers, at least have some sort of, some sort of lawn ornament there or something like that, because you know where it is moving forward, a rock, whatever it is.
Okay. I wonder how far septic tank effluent migrates through the soil in relation to the water table, and in regard to bacteria and nitrogen. The septic's contributed to nitrogen and groundwater.
Well, ideally, if designed correctly, they shouldn't. Here in Massachusetts, we actually do what's called a deep hole and perk test, and we will find, A, we look at the soil conditions, how fast the water goes through, but B, we find where the highest groundwater table had ever been. And from there, we make it 4 feet above that point. And whether that be, you know, natural earth that's there, we have to bring in soil to make a mound. We make sure we have a 4 foot of clean soil that's going to adequately clean that wastewater before it hits that highest groundwater table we ever found. So ideally, it should treat it. We also have regulations in nitrogen sensitive areas like groundwater wells, sometimes shellfish beds, other issues like that, that they'll make them either put in just a zoning basically that makes it, you can only put so much septic water in per acre, or you have to put a more higher treatment into it, some other further treatment than a normal septic system would be. So ideally, it should be, you know, cleaned in the soil, but you know, it all depends on how designed and how it's working, if you will.
Sure. Now, there is some research that shows that in some areas, there's a place in northern Illinois where septic tanks are known to contribute to the groundwater. And I don't have that information in front of me. I should have pulled that together. I didn't think about it until we got on the call. But yeah, it really depends on, you know, a state like Massachusetts that elevates tanks when they need to is much different than some other states where they just get put in the same way no matter what is going on with the water table. And so we do see that in some places.
And then we'll find nitrogen byproducts too sometimes will migrate through. So you won't get nitrogen, but you'll get nitrate, nitrite, and you'll find that in a well. So, you know, it can be that it just doesn't fully denitrify, have full denitrification before it hits the groundwater table.
Sure. Well, and I know there's been some, you know, when probably 25 years ago when folks really started getting interested in pharmaceuticals and personal care products, there was a groundwater researcher who he studied a large system at a school, so it wasn't, you know, just an individual system, but there was all kinds of caffeine and all kinds of common medicines that, you know, teenagers would take that were in the groundwater around the school, and so some of those things don't break down very well in those cases. So they're going to eventually get there. Okay. Another question we got several of, which we all get, comes up every time, is about softener backwash. And so, you know, I put up this thing from Rhode Island, basically saying that they recommend that brine be discharged below the ground surface in a dry well and not put into a septic system. And I know, and I'll caveat that by since then, Some other guidance has come out from the Water Quality Association and NAURA, National On-Site folks, that, you know, it depends on the type of software you have, how you're using it, how it's being regenerated, and that in some cases, or in those cases, it's okay to do. But I'll go back to, just as a practice, trying to limit the amount of total water you put through your septic tank. Probably a good idea not to if you don't need to, in my opinion. And like I said, there's information we can get you to read on that issue, but you might want to talk to your state too and see if they have any rules on that. Do you have any other information there, Jim?
Yeah, I was going to say in Massachusetts, it is against the rules completely. We do what's called a Title V inspection for transfer of property, and that'd be an automatic failure, is having it connected into your septic system. They would have to, you know, put it into a dry well and have it re-inspected in order to pass Title V. So it is something I see a lot of, doing well assessments though. The water treatment companies haven't got the memo, I guess, in Massachusetts, but I believe, don't quote me on it, but I believe Connecticut just the regulation and not allowing it to go into their wastewater septic systems either. So definitely check with your local authorities and what is allowed, what isn't allowed. Again, this one is kind of a controversial issue. Some people say it's okay, some people don't. So I think it really comes down to what's the regulation in your area. But I know here in Massachusetts, it's a no-no.
So anyone who has those well inspections, if they try to sell their house, are going to have to change it.
Yeah, and I commonly do it during the well assessment. I'll note it in there, just let them know that it's against Title V. I recommend them taking it out. If you're going to sell your house, you got to take it out. Sure. Someone like me is going to have to come in the door and just tell you again.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. So, I mean, you're really helping them out. So, okay. So what are my options if I live in a county with heavy clay soils that cause the water table to be shallow most of the year?
Well, I would say what much I mentioned about is mounding, you know, to bring in soil that isn't heavy clay that will give you that separation and treatment. It's also technology I know of. I don't want to say, you know, different names, but there's technology out there that's proved in Massachusetts that will give you a reduction in how much of that groundwater table, so that you need 4 feet to the groundwater table. They have some technology, we'll cut it to 2 feet of good soil before the groundwater table, so a combination might work to it too, but it's really, you know, getting some sort of treatable, you know, soil that can do treatment as opposed to the heavy clay that really won't and hold up your perk and probably just, you know, won't adequately treat the system. Probably end up backing up if it'll just won't, you know, go through that clay for a while.
Yeah. So when you say there's the treatment that's available, does that usually entail then additional maintenance or having to have someone come and, you know, change a filter or whatever?
Yeah, it all depends on the technology that it is. The one I'm thinking of, they say you don't need maintenance, but it's a kind of like a filter on your leach field, if you will. So I don't know, as long as that filter doesn't get clogged, I guess it's okay. But yeah, so you know, there's a lot of proprietary stuff there, and so you know, it might work for you know, in one scenario, but how long does it work in 20 years down the road? I'm not sure. So.
Interesting. So, thank you. Is an aeration system better than an ordinary septic tank and leach field, and why?
Well, it's I wouldn't say better. I mean, aeration system is going to give you more oxygen, so your aerobic bacteria are going to be more active and break down more waste. But at the same time, then you have a pump. Now you have other things that can go wrong. You know, electrical costs. You know, a regular septic system running on gravity, you know, has zero costs other than pumping. and flying out. So, you know, there's plus and minuses to everything. Does it further treat the system because it gets more aerobic bacteria, which it's more waste? Yes, but then is it more maintenance, more things to worry about, more electrical costs? Yes. So, and a lot of times, you know, the aeration system will be, there'll also be like a different media they put in to the tank. So, you know, an ideal media for the bacteria to grow better, if you will. So, you know, usually it's a dual process. So you give the bacteria, you know, the best place to grow and get and multiply, and you know, the more they multiply, the more they break down waste.
Great. Concrete versus PVC plastic or plastic tanks, pros and cons.
Well, concrete is tried and true. It's durable. You know, it's not recommended you drive over it, but you know, once it's in underneath the ground, you probably be okay. PVC, it's newer. It is more. It's easier to maneuver. And I think it might be a little bit cheaper too. At the same time, if you know, it's not going to hold up like concrete will, like I mentioned, you're trying to find the system and you're probing with a metal pole. That metal pole might go right through the PVC tank, as opposed to the concrete one. It's just going to bounce off. So, you know, there's pros and cons on each. So, you know, I wouldn't say one way or the other, but I'd say concrete's been working all these years. So, and it's very durable, but I understand why PVC is a lot easier to maneuver. I mean, a couple of guys can put a PVC tank in as opposed to a backhoe, you know, heavy equipment for a concrete tank. So
I guess it depends if you plan. Yeah, I mean, it's really about how long it's going to last. It sounds like.
yeah, and the durability. And I've also heard that sometimes PVC tanks you have to almost weigh them down if the groundwater table is a little too high.
Oh yeah, I bet.
They don't have the weight of it too, so I don't have too much experience with the PVC tanks. Still more concrete around here.
Now you mentioned fiberglass too, I think earlier.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard about fiberglass. I believe in Rhode Island, but again, concrete's still king around here from what I've seen.
Sure, we're starting to see fiberglass board wells, which is new to me. So interesting. Okay, distance between septic and well, considerations and rules.
Oh, in Massachusetts, the distance between your leach field and your well has to be 100 feet. And that's the code. Any 75 to 100, you can pass Title V. It's pre-existing, but you have to test the well, bacteria, nitrate, and other ammonia and other things like that. That might be from septic related. But anything new has to be a minimum of 100 feet. And that's 100 feet from all wells and all septics, so the neighbors, all that. So I think that's the distance I would go with.
So in Illinois, it's 75 feet, I think. So for considerations, you mentioned neighbors and stuff, because I've talked to a few inspectors who've said that their well was put in and their septic and the leach field, and come to find out it's certainly far enough away from the property owner's well, but it's pretty close to the neighbors. And so what if you don't know where the neighbor's well is? And I mean, I guess there's no way to deal with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you were to install a well or a septic system in Massachusetts, you would have to give a site plan to be approved by the local health department, and with that would have to be every well, every septic system, every house, property lines, wetlands, any of that would have to be included in that. So, to get approval to do anything like that moving forward, you just couldn't do it. That's all would have to be found out one way or another, if you will.
Oh, sure. Well, and what about where you have some properties that are only like a third of an acre, in some more high rent district areas? Do they typically just not put in a regular septic system? They have to put in something else?
Yeah, they can. There's a lot of technologies that'll cut down the footprint of your leach field and how far the groundwater table. Sometimes there's no other option than the tight tank. I've inspected a few of those, and they were waterfront. They were actually, one of them actually got their water from a tube that went into the lake in front of the place. But but it's good. But that's they just didn't have the setback from their neighbors. They didn't have the setback from the water, and the only option was a tight tank. And basically, the septic tank fills up. When it gets 2/3 full, an alarm goes off, and the septic company comes and pumps it.
So there's no outlet there? And so you call it a tie tank?
Tight tank.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be a tight tank. So basically, it's just a septic tank with no outlet. And they'll put an alarm in it. And then when it hits about 2/3 full, the alarm will go off in the house. So we'll let them know that, it's time to call the septic company to pump it. And yeah, and sometimes that's the only option.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. So once in a while, I get a brief odor of septic near my vent in my septic field. Is that normal? System's only 2 years old. It's got a good perk rate, plenty of separation from groundwater.
If it's, a hot, humid day and you're right next to the vent and you happen to get a small whiff, then I would say, yeah, and it's intermittent. If it's something that you can smell, the other side of the leach field, and it's, a fall crisp day, you probably have an issue going on. So the way they describe it is, I don't think it's a big deal. It's just catching at the right time, if you will, but it shouldn't be a common occurrence, if you will.
So
unless
you say,
really,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I said unless you're, really sticking your nose right up to the vent, But it should be an intermittent thing that just kind of goes away, and maybe the breeze catches it the right way or something like that.
So if it is a problem, then it's probably a plugged leach field, or partially plugged.
It could be a number of things. I don't, if it's not, if there's, like I said, if it's just an intermittent smell, I don't think it's an issue. But if it's something going on a while, then there might be something going on with the leach field, and it's not going down and perking up somehow, or not getting, it's just not doing its job, if you will.
Okay.
But if it's, like I said, if it's just a once in a while odor, I wouldn't be a big deal. But if it's something that's all the time, then there might be something to look further into. And there's other things, like maybe the grass is a little bit greener there, and the rest of the lawn's brown, or like any kind of issue like that.
Okay. Are there any safe flushable wipes? And if so, what are safe for septic?
Not that I know of. And that I don't think there's a flushable wipe. I don't think that's flushable. Most wastewater operators will tell you the same thing, that one of their biggest menaces now is, and just the city wastewater system, is these flushable wipes. They'll get caught in pumps and other filters, etc. They don't break down. So yeah, I've heard of even efforts to take the flushable off these wipes, if you will. So. Well,
and it really should. I've heard all the same things, especially from wastewater operators. And the bottom line is you should assume there are no flushable wipes, because they really haven't shown that they are. And so just because it says so, you can't believe it, is the bottom line. And you should never put them down on a toilet. So.
Yeah, and I hear it's even worse now because of the pandemic, that people are using much more of these disinfectant wipe kind of things, that they're just finding more and more. So it's actually gotten worse, and some of the local authorities have started campaigns trying to get the word out that these are not flushable. Please do not put them down the toilet.
Yeah, we've heard the same thing here. So, all right. Okay, so that's our canned part of our presentation. Katie, how are we doing on questions?
We have quite a handful of them.
Okay, well, just give me a second here, and I'll pull them up. I should have, there we go. Let me make that full screen and make it a little larger here. Oh, look out. Sorry. Went crazy there on me. That's pretty, is that, okay, let's do it this way. So we are having to have a new septic system installed. What causes a system to utterly fail? Concrete tank, gravel fields, what we had. We don't want to do this, have to do this again. This system is styrofoam looking beads and a plastic tank.
I mean, there could be a number of issues that made a septic system fail. It could be just installed in a high groundwater table. You finally got a biomet underneath your septic system, doesn't allow water to go down anymore, so it just basically it's beyond its life. As far as your new system, it sounds like what I was talking about. Having that media for the bacteria to grow on. Imagine there's probably some sort of way to get more oxygen to that system, so that in the styrofoam looking beads is probably the media. So that's probably proprietary to help more treatment, but I really couldn't comment any further on what that might be. But without knowing the whole situation, there's no reason to say that a new treatment would be any more efficient than the old regular system, installed within the purviews of where you live. I don't know what kind of soil you would have, what kind of regulations you have, so I'm really talking general at this point.
Okay. In the case of a spill on the ground surface, what can be used to clean up the site? Oh boy. That's kind of outside the purview of what we're talking about here, even for a private well class. When there's spills, it depends on what's the spill, how it reacts to the environment. Is it, if it's gasoline versus, there's just so many, some of those there's no cleaning it up. Some that require a consulting firm to come in and set up a pump and treat system. It's really, there's a lot of specifics there that aren't here, and it's really outside of what we can answer. If you want to email us more information, I can try to look into it. But, we don't do remediation work, and so I'd have to find someone else to answer that for you. So, do you have any recommendations to work with landscape companies when placing trees or when they're working with clients?
I would say don't put the trees on top of the leach field or the septic tank. Put them away from all of that. And I think, Steve, you mentioned before that the roots could run havoc on the system.
Yeah.
So you best off with just a nice lawn over it.
Well, and that's even a little distance away. You got to remember that nice little 6-foot tree that has a 1/2-inch diameter main trunk in 25 years is going to be a lot different. And so you want to be pretty far away unless you want to be replacing that in 25 years. So, a lot of septic systems will last a lot longer than that.
And kind of the rule on trees is as far as they are out of the ground wide, the roots are usually twice as wide. So. Yeah.
So the next question, do you think Rid-X is bad for septic tanks or systems? And what about adding copper sulfate? Katie put on here, Jim and Steve already answered this. I don't know that, I didn't say that they were bad necessarily. I said they were unnecessary. And I don't know about copper sulfate, I'll admit. Jim, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, same thing, Rid-X or any other biological additive. I wouldn't say it's bad. Anything that's just adding bacteria that you're already adding yourself, maybe it speeds it up a little bit. But all those microbes will naturally grow and proliferate anyways. Copper sulfate, I believe the only time I've ever heard of that being used is, I as a fungicide on agricultural plants. So anything that would, interrupt any, and I believe it's a fungicide because it raises the pH. So anything that, messes with the pH of a septic system would be bad too. A high pH is not going to help, because the microbes are made to be at probably about 7, if you will. So, but yeah, copper sulfate, I've never heard about adding that to a septic system.
Well, so I just looked that up, and it says that it's used as a treatment and it won't affect the bacteria, but I'm not sure what for. So, yeah, and maybe it is for tree roots.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's exactly, it is. So, we'd have to find someone who actually has done that or understands that more. Yeah. And I certainly can ask if some of the septic installers I know, yeah, it doesn't sound like it affects the bacteria, though, based on what I just looked up in those 10 seconds. So, anyway, news to me. Okay.
Me too.
Yeah. So what do you suggest people with very hard water do if you recommend that softener backwash not go in the septic system?
We recommend it goes into a dry well. Basically a separate area outside the house. I've seen people just put it on their lawn. I've seen other people build like a little shallow like well that's rounded with rocks or something, and it basically just drains into the ground from there. But you just don't want it going into your septic system. Well, I guess it's against regulation. Some people say it's bad. Some people say it's not a big bad. So, but your recommendation would be into a dry well. If you're, like a larger public water system, you actually have to get, in Massachusetts, you'd have to get a permit and actually have to put it into almost like a septic system type structure. I've dealt with a few systems that put in a limestone contactor, which is just a pH adjuster. And when that backwash, we actually had to put in the infiltrator, it's like basically a leach field type thing, just to get that backwash going in. And had to get a permit from DEP and engineering, you name it. So on a private well setting, you wouldn't have to go that far, but you can see that anything that we, as public water systems, that we do in private wells. So it is that big of a deal to them not putting it into that ground, into that septic system. So if you can put it into that dry well, or even on just shitty lawn, very much better than what you are doing now.
Yeah, in Illinois, I don't know. I'd have to look into it. I imagine some people just charge it on the ground.
Yeah, sometimes I see just a tube coming out of the basement and it just basically goes into the ground.
Yeah.
Or to a flower garden that's out front or something.
So, okay. Could I build raised bed gardens on top of the tank or drain field area?
I would not, definitely not the tank, because you're going to have to remove the raised bed to get into the tank. The bed, I wouldn't suggest it either. If it fails, you'd be, this is going to be edible gardens. You could have contamination. You're watering that, putting water down goes into the leach field. You put enough water down and rain, it's doing enough to, you want that to dry out in between. So I would recommend you just leave your raised beds in another area and keep this just lawn.
I didn't even think about the fact that you're going to water it. That's a good point. That's probably the biggest problem.
I actually ran into this in one of my communities. When I went up to look at a septic issue, and this was in a public water system, public wastewater system, and they had built community gardens right on top of the leach field.
Oh, wow. Okay, can the speaker please touch on septic in or near floodplain and is septic allowed in floodway in your state?
We're not, no, septics are not allowed in the floodway in our state whatsoever, or any kind of floodplain. near a floodplain, most likely would make sure it's out of it and it's up gradient as much as possible. But yeah, that's not something that would be allowed here. It would all be kind of brought in the site plan review, if you will.
Well, there shouldn't be any structures in a floodplain, right?
No, but
No,
even if the
eventually.
house was trying to put a septic into, a house was on the edge of it, wanted to put a septic system into it, if you will, or something like that.
Oh, sure. Okay. If a septic system backs up into the house building, is there a risk that it contaminated the well? I would say no. Not
if it's in the building,
yeah.
unless you had like a flood drain or something like that. But no, I wouldn't think so. Well, sometimes your well's in your basement, so.
Well, that's very rare, but it does happen.
Yeah.
But
no, I don't think it would be an issue.
It's actually kind of a closed system at that point, and it's coming back in the house instead of going out into the ground. So it necessarily wouldn't affect your well if your well's on the other side of the house and all things being the same, would be my view of that. Okay, how do we measure the solids and sludge depth?
Your best bet would be what's called a sludge judge. It's basically a big straw with a cap on it that you would insert into the tank, and then if you put your finger on top of the straw and keeps the liquid in and takes it out of the top, it's the same concept as a little plug at the top that would keep that, and then you can pull it out, and basically you would see your scum, your clear liquid, and your sludge. And then from there, you would just kind of measure it up, and if you're about 50, 60%, it's time to pump. The basic homeowner could use basically a stick. You can take a look at your scum layer. Sludge is kind of a little bit hard, but it's probably the best bet to do it. If not, just looking in there and seeing what you see. Sometimes if you open it up and you really can't see water anymore, it's pretty evident. So.
Okay, yeah, I've heard the sludge judge a lot. Most installers have one. I would say that you might want to have someone come and do that rather than trying to do it yourself. But,
yeah, definitely. The stick is a real primitive method to try to do it.
Yeah. Is there an academic way to know when the tank needs pumping? I don't think there's any way to know for sure, because it really depends on the use over the past whatever amount of time since the last time you had it pumped. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there's no academic way. It's all based on use and what you do.
Yeah, and that can vary. You could have more people in the home. You could have had someone staying for a month. There's just so many variables there that you'd have to track to really try to do the maths per se.
Do you have a garbage disposal, anything like that will, cut it real quick.
Okay, so and how to determine tank size? You mentioned what you do in Massachusetts.
Yeah, well, normally I'm trying to find if you can find records, that's great. Normally it's 1,000, 15, 2,000, 1,000 being the most common out there. If you can you can do some rough math if you're in the field and you can find where the edges are and how deep it is. You can always, do the calculations, how many gallons could be in there, but those would probably be your easiest ways. In Massachusetts, the smallest tank we're allowed to install is 1,000 gallons. So if it's a 2-bedroom house, you have to have a 1,000-gallon tank, even though, that's for a 3-bedroom house. So there's a lot of variables there. How old it is. Regulations were not what they were in the 70s that they are now. So there's a lot of different variables on that.
Well, and it really depends on, again, even on use. Some families of 4 may use, 150 gallons per person per day, and some others may only use 70 gallons per person per day. Are people home all day? Are they at work all day? There's so many variables there. It really depends on your situation.
I will say that there was an article in the paper around here that about the health directors is seeing a lot more failures in pre-existing septic systems now that people are home for everything. So
I bet.
you used to have 9 to 5, 9 to 6. No one was using anything, and now everyone's using everything all the time. So.
Yeah, I bet that's really, it'd be interesting to have some information on that or data. So, okay, so what happens if the system is emptied too often? Say your chart recommends 12 years and the tank has been emptied every 2.
Well, actually, doing kind of the reverse is your, that biologics we mentioned is built up and it's revving up there. Once you pump it, you took most of that out of there. So what you really did is, stop your biological processes from running at their optimal capacity, if you will. So that would be the major thing that you would do.
So when they pump a tank, they pump it completely dry?
Not completely, but pretty much, yeah. They'll go right down to pretty much the bottom. And, good septic guys will actually, kind of scrub the sides a little bit too, make sure they get all the solids.
Okay, so basically then every 2 years this person is starting over and it has to build back up. Do you have any idea how long that takes?
It would all depend on temperatures, really. I always like to recommend people pump their system, and this is kind of just I don't know if it's scientifically proven, but at the same time, everything moves quicker during the summertime. So why would you pump your tank when going into winter when everything's going to slow down? I always thought, if you pump in the springtime, then the soil's getting the warmest it's going to be. That's when your biological process is going to be raring to go. I always recommend, if you can, pump in the spring, then you have all summer to get those biological processes roaring to go before you go into winter and they slow down a little bit. Biological zero is about 41, and once you get below that, things really start slowing down, if you will.
So basically, every time you pump, your tank is basically trying to regenerate and start over, but it's not like it's being done too often. It just means that has to happen, but it will. And the best approach would be, if you want to pump it more often to be safe, would be to do it in the spring so that your tank will get back online, so to speak, and have a full set of bacteria quicker as it gets into the summer and warmer weather.
Exactly. Kind of the same way I would, like when I do well assessments and people ask me when should I test my well, I always kind of recommend July and August. In the public water systems, that's when we see the most bacteria hits. Well, because it's the warmest biological process at the fastest rate. So some people might take a bacterial test in January of their well. Well, they might have a good well cap, and their issue might be insects or other little things getting in there and causing photocoliform issues. But in January, those aren't going on. So they think everything's great. They tested in January, everything's great. But if you would have tested in August, you have a total coliform issue, or maybe even worse.
That's good advice. Makes a lot of sense. If a leach field is designed to handle 300 gallons per day and you continually discharge 500 gallons per day, what kind of damage could it do?
You'll hydraulically ruin the system. Basically, the soil just won't be able to absorb that much water, and if you continue to do it over and over again, you'll just become saturated, and there's just be nowhere else for the water to go other than up or back in, if you will. And that's kind of when we do a soil evaluation, we want to know how fast the water drains, as well as how far the groundwater table is. So, if you were going to do if you were to do a 500-gallon system, you'd have a larger leach field, so more area to spread that water out. When you're spreading that water out into that small area, sooner or later that small area is going to just not be able to take any more. I had a leach field that we fixed at as a pressure dose system. It had 10 different And one of the trenches was getting all the flow because it was installed wrong. Once we installed it right and turned off that one trench for a year, the other 9 we were able to take the system on for the rest of the year. We turned that other one on about 9 months later, and that started accepting the water too. And we were able to regenerate that because, I had 9 months of no flow going into that one trench, and they came back. But yeah, it's, the reason why we have the size of the leach field for how much water is we can spread that out equally and have a large enough areas that the ground can take it.
Okay. Are there any situations that the chamber style drain field system would be undesirable?
I have to look at different situations. I top of my head, I can't think of anything, but that's all different regulations, different states. So.
Oh, sure. Okay. We relocated to my husband's grandmother's farm, and we are on a septic system. How do we find out about the septic system size and how to pump it? There is no opening to the septic tank. It is buried, and lateral lines run from the house about 150 feet away from the house. His grandmother's 101, and no one seems to know anything about the septic system. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a unique situation.
That's a long run for a wastewater system, 150 feet. I'd like to know where that comes out. That's a long way to bring before a septic tank.
Well, they may have had 10 kids back in the day,
Yeah, wow. Without, when you're talking 100 feet, 150 feet away, that's a lot of probing with a metal probe.
Well, I think it says that the lines run 150 feet from the house. I don't mean the tank is that far.
Okay, I thought it was a 150 lateral line, and then before it hits a tank.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it'd be the same advice. I would guess. You'd have to try to follow the line from the house.
Yeah. Or maybe a snake with a that has like a GPS or link finder to it. If they snake it from the house and then saw how many feet away you finally hit the septic tank, that might help you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah. There's no easy one to that. It might be one of the old farmhouses too. They used to use cesspools. What they used to do is when one cesspool filled up, they would just dig another hole and put another pipe into the next one, and just keep going out, if you will.
Okay. Yeah, so we don't have a great answer there, but it's still.
Yeah.
I mean, and as far as finding out the system, if it's buried, if you can't access it and get in it, there's no way to figure out the size. If you could probe it and find it, you could probably estimate at least the width and the height, or width and the 2 dimensions of the cap. But knowing how thick it is and how deep it is, yeah. Yeah, sorry, it's just a tough one. You'd probably need to go to a septic professional to try to find out. Have you ever heard of installer? I meant. Have you ever heard of a zero discharge system that discharged to a rock and plant pond?
No, I don't. I'm kind of confused with the whole wording of it. Zero discharge system that discharges.
Yeah. Well, maybe what they're saying is the rock and plant pond is part of the zero discharge system. So.
Oh, okay. I've heard of it in not a septic system, in a wastewater system in Western Massachusetts. There was one that a small town out there that went into basically get treated with some sort of vegetation in a greenhouse, as water treatment as opposed to, oil treatment, but never in a septic now.
Interesting. Okay, I have a seasonal cabin with 1,000-gallon tank. It gets heavy use in the summer, almost no use in the winter. Is this actually good to give the bacteria the winter to break down the solids? I think you already answered that.
Yeah, no, I don't think the bacteria are really active during the winter because especially if there's no warm water going down there, and if you're in a northern climate, the water that the soil temperature is bringing it down the temp, and I don't think that the bacteria, if they're still active, they're very, very lethargic.
Yeah, and they're not getting any food. That's the secret.
Yeah. Or even if the food's there, they're just they're sleeping too much to want to eat, basically.
All right. So yeah, not a good idea. All right. Well, that's all the questions we have. Thanks for sticking around, everyone. Jim, thank you very much. Katie, you too. And we'll have a webinar next month. Look on our webpage for that. I don't think we've decided what we're going to do yet. So, but soon, probably within the next week, Katie and I will get together and come up with what our next 2 or 3 webinars will be, and those will be on our webpage. So thanks for attending. If you have any other questions, there's our email address. And if you need CEUs or CEs, use the same address to get a hold of us, and we'll go from there. All right. Hey, thanks again, Jim. I really appreciate your advice and help. And everyone take care.
Take care, everyone.